I'm making this video to explain what happened to me the other day on my last mission. I've told this story so many times since the events had happened that I'm just tired of repeating myself, and I can just submit this video to friends and family who are curious on what had happened to me. On Wednesday evening, I was given a mission briefing about we are going to go into a town that had Russian occupiers in it, and we were going to remove these Russian occupiers from this town. On Wednesday evening, as we left for this mission, wasn't until early Thursday morning that we got outside of this town, right before dawn. The unit commanders, the two unit commanders of the two teams that we were with, made a game plan on how they were going to attack this town. They informed us how we were going to proceed in attacking this town, and then we moved and proceeded on approaching the town. The plan changed as we approached the town, as it was clear we were not going to face any resistance. In fact, every Russian soldier in this town had to have been asleep. The first guard post, as we approached the town from the north, and we were in the northeastern corner of the town as we approached. And there was a BDM-4 tank under a tree next to a house. And in this house, there were two Russian soldiers sleeping. And this was an observation house. This means that the house had windows designed to look out and see if anybody was coming from this position. These two Russian soldiers were asleep. So we go in, members of my team go in and wake up these soldiers, and we restrain them and pull them out of the house and make them to start to walk back to the Ukrainian lines with some security escorts. As we're in this town, one of the other members of the team asks me, how are we going to destroy this tank, the BDM-4 that I'm now standing next to? And at this moment in time, I'm looking around for a rock big enough, and what I was going to do was I was going to jam that rock into the barrel. The gun was lowered a little bit, so I could actually, if I wanted to, shove the rock in the barrel. And the reasoning for this was very cartoonish. When they fired that main gun, that first round would have impacted that rock, and it would have more likely banana peeled that gun. So that was the original plan. It would have been quiet. I would have been able to jam the rock in there so it would not easily come out. And I doubt that the Russian conscripts or the Russian soldiers that were in this town would have looked down the barrel before loading a round if there was no round loaded in there before firing. And that would have taken this gun out of commission. Not only destroyed this gun, but also destroyed the coaxial 30mm cannon. Mind you, this is a BDM-4 airborne tank. So, as I'm looking around for a rock and doing another thing, we get compromised. We can hear the Russians shouting in the street, and one of our guys shouts back and lets off a machine gun burst. At this point in time, I understand that there's no time for me to find a rock or use it to disable this tank. There was a sledgehammer nearby, and I was going to use that to help push the rock in if need be. I then peer around the building that I'm standing next to, south down the axis of this street, and I can see Russians running back and forth. I then take my AK and I start putting some rounds down this street towards these Russians that were running around. They were coming outside of their buildings, they were running to different positions. Some of them were shooting back. I was suppressing these. I then start to leave the town, and my team leader is the last one. He's on the east side of the road's running north. I'm on the west side of the road. I take out my Bull Spike AT missile. I prepare it. I aim it at the turret of this tank. I aim it at the gun of this tank. I fire, and the rocket impacts right above the gun of this tank. Mind you, the gun is pointed down a little bit. I was trying to get the rocket in between the gun and the coaxial 30mm cannon. I see it explode on the turret. The tank doesn't catch on fire. It didn't hit anything flammable inside, but I am certain that it destroyed the mechanisms inside the turret to help utilize that turret to elevate and depress the gun. We then take off running. We go around some trees across a field to get to a canal. And as I'm running across this field, I get to the end of the field to where the canal is, and we have guys going down into the canal to come up on the other side. We start taking machine gun fire from one of the windows. I start to suppress the machine gun fire with my AK, and I dumped mag in the city with a couple full auto bursts. I loaded in a new mag as I approached the house. I start to suppress the window from where I saw machine gun fire coming from until the last man is over the trench. And then I jump from my side of the trench, trying to clear to the other side, because the sides of this trench, this canal, are steep. They're also slippery and muddy. And I get about halfway up the trench from my landing. And then I grab into the vegetation that's on the trench. And there's 3 guys inside this trench, and they're scrambling trying to get up, but they keep slipping and falling down. And I slap my leg, and I shout at them, and the one guy looks up, and he sees, and he grabs onto my leg, and then grabs onto my body armor and starts to pull himself up. One of the 3 guys had managed to climb up, and then the other guy, the 3rd guy, he manages to pull himself up on me. And as he's on the top of the berm, I reach over, and I just grab his ankle, and then he pulls me up with his foot. I climb to the top, and we start running down this road. So there's this canal, and it's thick with vegetation, reeds and stuff. And then there's this road right here. And this road's on top of this berm. So this road sits on top of this berm, and then on either side it's just kind of dirt. And we're running on the left side of this berm. And as we're running, we start to take mortar fire. So 120mm mortars were the first thing in position, shelling our location. And this is probably 5 or 6 minutes after the initial contact. And at this time too, there were 2 tanks in the village. And we know this from our mission briefing prior to this. I disabled one of those tanks with my rocket. And this disabling did 2 things. 1, it bought us time before they brought a tank to bear on us. And 2, it only brought 1 tank to bear on us instead of 2. So by time the Russians had gotten their other tank around the village or through the village to where we were, had given us time to get probably 500 or 600 meters away from the village. Now here's the village, here's the river canal, and here's the roadway that we're running across that's just west of the village. So we're up, here's the village down here, we're up here, a good, by line 5 kilometers straight forward, but by trigonometry math 700-800 kilometers away from the village. The other tank is positioned somewhere near the village, and I hear it. I can hear the engine, I can hear the tracks as it moved, and I hear the first tank shot, and it lands somewhat far behind us. Then the next tank shot is adjusted, so they either had a drone in the air at this time, but the next tank shot impacted directly behind me. And directly behind me, there were 2 Ukrainians. One of which I've only seen a few times, another one that I had served with and had done missions with for a while, and he was a good man. So the tank shell explodes right behind me, And I feel the difference between the tanks and the artillery is when you have an artillery, you hear the artillery incoming, and you have that split second to, or really a second to 2 seconds to get onto the ground to avoid shrapnel from the artillery. You don't have that with a tank round, and these are 100 millimeter tank rounds being fired out of this BDM tank, the BDM-4. So you hear whoosh, and then the impact of the round onto the ground. And I heard that, the first one, and I was like, that's a fucking tank, run, 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 run. And a few seconds later, and I hear it again. This time, the round was so close to us that the blast knocked me off my feet. I'm on the left side of the berm, and we're running along this berm, and the blast, it impacted in the middle of the roadway, and the shrapnel went into the 2 Ukrainians that were behind me. And part of the shrapnel actually penetrated my IFAK, ripped out my IFAK, destroyed the lower thing. So I'm running with my weapon like this. It blows through my IFAK, destroys part of the sling of my AK, and then it knocked me off my feet. And I'm on the ground, and I look over, and one of the Ukrainians, he's close enough to me, and I grab him by the arm. I'm partially down the berm. He's on the top of the road. And I pull myself up, and I grab him, and I say, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" He's laying there, his eyes are open. And I look down at his legs, and I just see his lower extremities just eviscerated. And then I look over, and I see the body of the other Ukrainian. I didn't know who the second Ukrainian was. I didn't see his face. But I just see his body lying there. And just, there's debris and blood everywhere. And I look up, and I see my team commander from this mission. And he's standing there. And I think this is when he took a shrapnel wound. Maybe, because he's in pain. He's frustrated. He's angry. And I see some more of our Ukrainian comrades slightly further back. They're okay. And I tell them we need to run. We need to go now. You know, these tanks, they have a relatively quick rate of fire. And at this time, again, we have artillery coming. So we take off and we keep running. And then the tank fire keeps getting more and more accurate. We get down on the side of the berm, the left side of the berm, but we have this open field right here. Now the problem is the mortars are landing in this field. We're running along this berm. You know, why don't you run in the field? Well, it's kind of difficult, right? So we're running along this berm. The tank rounds are impacting on this berm. Like, we hear them. There was one time that the tank round hit the right side of the berm and ricocheted off. If you watch Fury, that noise, it's what had happened. And I've heard them a couple times here when we had tank-on-tank battles when I was in Mykolaiv before, when we were part of the operations, when we were crossing the Inuits. I heard the tank round ricochet off. But I'm running along the berm. We hear this round come off. The artillery is now getting thick. We are now getting 120 millimeter mortared and 102 howitzers. And it's getting bad. And there's a group of about 10 of us. We are the rear echelon, the forward echelon of the group. They're already, you know, miles ahead of us. And we can't see them anymore. So we make the decision, just me saying we need to go across the field and pointing across the field because there's another canalway. And then my team commander, he's like, you know, shouting at the guys in Russian, because he speaks better Russian than Ukrainian, to go to the canalway as well. So we all run across this not open field, there's another berm that divides two fields. And I've seen from the map, so I know how far that berm was to the village, and I know how far we were from that berm when the first tank round, or the second tank round technically, the second tank round almost took me out. So we run along that berm that's kind of protecting us until we hit that canal, and we jump into that canal, and it's thick with vegetation, which is good, and we start running north in this canal. So the canal's west of the berm road, and then, you know, the canal that was next to the berm road is it's a seasonal river. So there's reeds in there, there's water in there. We weren't going to run in there because east of that canal is the Russians' positions. And they would see the reeds as they moved anyway. But we get into the canal to the west, and we start running. Now this gave us two advantages. One, they could not direct fire their tanks at us anymore. And they were also direct firing 73 millimeter rockets. Those are fired from the BMP and the SPG guns. And I could tell that those were being fired at us because they make a much different noise when they're incoming than tank rounds, mortar rounds, artillery rounds. So they were firing those. They were firing 120 millimeter mortars. They were firing 122 millimeter howitzers. And about halfway from our base, or from our village that we started from, and this village that we attacked, they started firing rocket artillery at us with submunitions. So we get in this canal, we start to run a little bit in this canal, and we hear a drone overhead, and we all hide underneath the foliage as this drone is there. And at this point, they're shelling the fields around us. They're shelling this canal. They know we're in this canal, but they don't know where we are at this time, I guess. And at this time, I realized that I needed to fucking pee. So I lift up the groin flap on my body armor. I undo my pants, and I just start pissing. I'm crouched on my knees. I just start pissing there in this trench. And behind me are 3 Ukrainian guys. In front of me are 3 or 4 Ukrainian guys and my team commander. And then he speaks a little bit of English, and he's like, "We need to run, we need to go." And I was like, okay. And I look at the other guys, I was like, we need to go. One of them's wounded in the arm, the other one has blood on his face, and then there was a third one with them as well. And they're like, we can't run, you know. And then the other team, I look over, the other team, they just leave. And I'm not upset with this, because it was better that we split up than stay together, because if you got 8 or 10 guys running in the canal together, we're a better target for the artillery, because there's a lot more guys there. So they're going to want to try to target us more than 1 or 2 guys running in the trench ahead of us. So these guys take off running. And they take off running in the trench. We stay underneath the foliage for a little bit, and we start hearing the rocket artillery come in with the submunitions. And you hear the rocket come in, it just sounds like a rocket. And then you hear a small explosion in the air. And what that is the body of the rocket separating. And you get these coming out. This is a submunition for these rockets. And inside here is just a little explosive. It's about as harmful as a grenade. It's deadly, and there's several of these, 3 or 4 of these inside a mortar, but I don't know how many inside the rockets. But you hear these just on the ground. And basically what that was is these things are just firing off on the ground, detonating, and they can cover a larger area with smaller explosions. And they're trying to get these things to explode over the trench so that they can get us underneath. So they'll fire off one of these, and it would explode, and then it would explode. They'll adjust the angle, they're fired again. So they're kind of getting close to the trench. They're dialing in their artillery. So I look at these guys, I say, okay, it's time we go. So we start running, we start taking more artillery fire. And at this time, when I left the village, I fired my AT rocket at the tank turret, disabling that tank turret. This one right here. My team commander handed me another one of these rockets when we were leaving the village, and I was originally going to use it to engage the window of one of the houses, but again decided against that. And I'm kind of glad, because the rocket he handed me was over my left shoulder. When we get to the canal area and we start to move again, I find another one of these rockets inside the canal. And I pick it up and I take off the rocket I was handed in the village, and I notice that it is perforated with shrapnel. So it's now useless. I can't use it. It's now just weight. So I chuck it into the canal and I grab this other rocket. I throw it on my back. I start running. I'm running with this group. We had already separated from the other group, and we start running. We run until we get to some thick coverage again. We hide under there because we hear the drones coming over again. So the drones are flying back and forth, searching this canal. They know we're in the canal now, so they're searching the canal. They're searching. They're looking around the fields, I'm assuming. But they know that we're in the canal, and we hide, and we wait there to catch our breath, and then artillery starts to pound around near the canal. And we know we have several minutes to get out of that area. Or not several minutes, less than a minute to get out of that area before, they're more precise. So they have an idea, okay, this is where I think they're going to fire. They fire, they miss, they adjust their tubes, and they fire again. And we're not going to give them the chance to get us. So we take off running again. I find another one of these rockets. So now I have the spent rocket, which I will explain why I kept it, even though it's disposable. One of these rockets, and then a second rocket. And I throw it on my back, and I run. And I have my AK, I have my plate carrier, which is damaged. And I keep running. We then get to a point in where it's some thick brush. I decide to go through the brush. They go out of the trench and come back down, and I thought that was a stupid idea. And then the guy comes, I'm stuck in the brush, right? Like there's a branch and it's just grabbing my plate carrier, it's grabbing all these rockets and stuff. The guy comes over, he breaks that branch, I'm able to slither out, and we're all resting there underneath these trees that are growing on this canal. And they're like, we're going to stay here until night, and we're going to go to the village. And I was like, no, we're almost to the village. We're like 1 kilometer plus away from the village. Let's go. Let's get out of here. I want to go home tonight. And they're like, no, we're tired. So I was like, okay, fine. So I start to go ahead of them. And I say, I'm going to go to the village. If you guys are going to stay, then stay. And I'm not going to stay with these guys if they want to stay and then they start to get shelled again. So I use this opportunity. I take off running. So I'm running in the canal, and they come with me. We get to another point of there's trees, and they're like, we're staying. And I say, okay, fine. You guys stay. The village is right there. We're almost there. So I start running in the canal again, and ahead of me, I see a body lying on the ground. And I'm thinking, I know it's a Ukrainian because we're right next to the village and the Russians aren't coming. And I'm thinking he's dead. So I run up to him, and he's just lying on his back. And he's just in the middle of the canal, lying up in the sun. And I crouch down by him, and I say, are you okay? Are you okay? And all he can do is just move his eyes and look around. And we start taking artillery again. Behind me, in front of me, the village is taking artillery. The fields to the left and right of me are taking artillery. And behind me in the trenches where the other guys were is taking artillery. And I grab him by the hand and I say, you're okay, I'll be with you. I'm staying with you. And the artillery falls, and then it stops. And then I look up over the berm, the canal, and I'm looking to see where to go or what to do, and I see these ambulances pull up to this house. And I look and I see movement in the house. I hear people shouting, and I say, "There's the ambulances. The ambulances are right there. I'm gonna go get help. I will be right back." And I crawl out of the canal and I start running across this field about 200 meters from where I was with this guy to where the house is. So I'm running to this house and I see them pulling out a stretcher and carrying a guy out on a stretcher. And I see, other guys being helped out with, leg injuries and stuff. And I hear crying and I hear, screaming. And I get to the fence of this house and there's an ambulance driver there. And he speaks okay English. And I meet him later on. I'll tell you about that. And I shout to him. I'm like, hey, I have a wounded soldier in the canal. I need help. And he says, "Are you injured?" And I was like, "No, I'm fine. But the soldier in the canal, he's bleeding from the arm. I need help." And he's like, "We can't stay. We have to go." And so I say, "Okay, go. I will go. But come back. Send somebody back for me. Tell somebody that I'm here." And the ambulance driver gets in the ambulance and he takes off. So I run into the house. I take off the rocket launchers. I take off my AK. I take off my body armor, which it's not functional really because this side is now open. The body armor moves around. There's nothing keeping it tight to my body. I take off my helmet. I keep my Peltors on. I keep my iPro on. And then I just book it to the trench. I get into the trench. There's still artillery falling in the village. There's still artillery falling in the fields around us, but mostly behind me, where I'm assuming the other group of guys that I had left behind were still hiding. I go to the guy. I jump into the trench almost on top of this guy, and I land there, and he's wearing his battle belt. His plate carrier's already taken off. His backpack is already on the ground. And I take off his battle belt, and I said, "I'm going to carry you to the house." And he keeps grabbing his battle belt and trying to put it back on. I tell him, no. And then I grab his left arm. He's wounded on the right arm. He's laying on his back, so I grab his left arm, and I bring it over my neck. And I put my left arm underneath his leg. I throw him up onto my shoulders into a fireman carry. And now this canal is about this deep, about chest deep. So I have him on my back. He's about my size, probably 180 pounds like I am. I grab him, throw him on my back, climb up out of the canal, and I start running the 200 meters back to the house. And I know it's about 200 meters because after all this, I'll tell you later in the story. And I run him to the house. As I'm running him to the house, I see one of the ambulances driving on the dirt road and passes me, and I start shouting and I wave and I'm like, hey, I'm carrying this guy on my shoulders, and he just drives out of there. I talked to that ambulance driver later. He did not even see me in the field. He was just focused on getting out of this town because, again, there's artillery falling in the town as well as in the field behind me. But the field I was in, there was no artillery falling, so I felt safe and confident enough that the tubes were pointed elsewhere, and it would take them, a little bit of time, few seconds or a minute to adjust to where I am if a drone operator said, "Hey, we got a guy carrying a guy in the open." So I get maybe about 50 meters shy of the house, and my legs start to give out. And I can't carry this guy anymore. And I was like, I can't carry you. I need you. I need your help. I need you to help me. I don't think his legs were injured at this time, and they weren't. But all he had was just a lot of blood on his arm. His left leg had a lot of blood on it. So I was kind of thinking that his left leg was also injured, but he didn't have a tourniquet on it. So I put him down. I take his left arm and I put it onto my shoulder. And I grab his belt with my right arm, and I stand up, and he kind of helps a little bit, and I basically drag him that remaining 50 meters. We cross over this hole that's in the fence. I drag him into the house and I lay him on the bed. And as I did this, artillery started dropping right near my position. So we're sitting in the room, and this room's in the center of the house. So you have the room we're in. Right here in the front was this patio. Right back here was a kitchen. Right here was another room, and then another room down here. And you had the walkway, immediate turn left, there was this small narrow room. And there was a couple beds in this room. And that's where we were. That's where I laid him down on the bed. I sit down on the floor. The house starts shaking. We start receiving artillery. I grab him by the hand. I say, it's okay, we're safe. It's okay, we're safe. Just as long as an artillery round does not directly hit above the room we're in, because they're 120s and they're 122s and they're using rockets with submunitions. We're relatively safe in this structure, because if it hits the room next to us, we're going to get hit by blast pressure, but, we're not going to get hit by shrapnel, really, because, again, how artillery explodes, when the shell hits the ground, it makes basically a cone-shaped shrapnel cloud upwards. So if you're below that shrapnel cloud, that's why, when we had guys that were injured I've had artillery hit right next to me, like feet from me. And I've survived because I was slightly lower to the ground, like in a little divot, and I'm below that shrapnel. The Russians are using ground burst artillery. And only once out here have they used air burst, and I might tell that story later. So I'm now in the house. I'm with this Ukrainian soldier. He's not talking. He's just shell-shocked. I check him. I check his right leg, because I think it's bleeding. The pant leg's just covered him. His pant leg's just brownish red in the entire leg. And it's dry blood by now. So I squeeze it and I try to feel for any wet blood. And I don't feel any wet blood. I have just bare hands. I don't have any gloves with me. Again, my IFAK is destroyed. We had some medical stuff in this house, but for the most part, I check him. I check the rest of his body. I lift up his shirt. I grab around his body. I feel his other leg. He's fine. I check the tourniquet. I check the tourniquet to make sure that it's tight. And then I take the tail of the strap, and I wrap it around the windlass, and I put it underneath the tab that says time. And I secure the tourniquet so that it's better secured. And then I go into the other room where there was medical supplies all over the floor, and there was a lot of blood everywhere in this room, in the entryway. And I find a space blanket still in the package, and I rip open the package. I open up the space blanket, and I cover this Ukrainian soldier. He's sweating, he's all white, he's breathing erratically, but not just in a way that it was concerning for me. I wanted to make him comfortable. I wanted to make sure he didn't go into hypothermia. He was definitely in some sort of shock. He was definitely just shell-shocked from this experience. And I'll continue this story in part 2.